So we had a quick discussion over here following the victory against the Tennessee Titans on Sunday, which in some part, admittedly, was me patting myself on the back a little bit, right? Taking a little bit of a victory lap over here on the microphone. But the greater point in all of that was I was trying to take away something from this game, from this season, really, that we've seen from the Colts so far. That isn't just, the Colts are good at football, which, by the way, the Colts are pretty damn good at football right now. There's no question about it. But maybe something that didn't focus so much on the team's performance or an individual's performance, right? Like instead, were we able to can we take away something about the game of football, how we perceive it? Is there a greater lesson here? Maybe how we talk about the team, how we advise our team, how we judge the moves our team makes or does not make? Is there something that this season that the Indianapolis Colts have put on display teaches us about how those discussions should be handled moving forward? And the conclusion that I had expressed, the lesson I thought we should take, which, by the way, is very much rooted in the goal of the show that we have over here, is simple. We should always try to play devil's advocate to our own emotional response, to our need for instant gratification, the quick fix to any problem that arises. We should constantly be questioning what it is that our emotion tells us to do in those situations. And by the way, that's probably a good lesson for life, right? Like, I know at the moment we're talking about football, but that's a lesson for the kids there to take with you on your journey moving forward. For anyone who's gambled or traded in the stock market before, or both, right? You would know. When you abandon your critical thinking in favor of your emotions, like only 10% of what it is that you do in those two things is about what you actually know. The other 90% is having the emotional discipline, the emotional maturity to defer to that 10% as opposed to the 90%. If you don't do that, that's when you're going to end up in trouble. You're going to do something that's rash. You're going to do something that's illogical. You're going to do something that actually works against the goal that you're trying to achieve, which in some ways is kind of counterintuitive. And it's not to say that your emotional reaction is never justified, that it isn't pointed in the right direction, like it isn't rooted in some level of truth. It may very well be, but if you used your emotions to make your decisions, it makes you no different than a 3-year-old toddler. Like, that's just the reality. And that's harsh, okay? Listen, I, just as much as anyone, am guilty of falling victim to my own feelings and emotions. But I sit here and I speak the truth to you. Now, I know what you're thinking right now. What the fuck is all this philosophical bullshit, Justin? Like, we're over here trying to talk about football. Fine. I'll tie it back in. The very thing that I just spoke about is what drives narratives across this league, which in turn drives the narratives about the Indianapolis Colts, the discourse that we have as fans, the stories that the media gives to you. It's the same thing that had Colts Nation wanting to fire Shane Steichen, fire Chris Ballard, shit on Daniel Jones just because they wanted Anthony Richardson to be the guy. It's those very same emotions that now, today, as we speak and as we're discussing today, are driving another narrative that the Colts need to make a trade at the deadline. They've got no choice. With everything that's on the line this season, they must make a trade, and they must do it right now. All chips into the middle of the table. And I'll tell you what, theoretically, like as a mental exercise, I don't kind of hate that as like a rah-rah type of thing, right? But my one exception with that statement is that when you say they need to do it, it's fundamentally different than talking about whether or not they'd benefit from one. Like, when you say they need to do it, you strip away all the nuance from the idea, right? Like, all the gray area is gone. It just turns to black and white. Like, there's no discussion to be had. At that point, it's just they got to do it. And if not, they completely failed. And that's just not the truth, right? Once you use words like need and now, like we need it now, with something as subjective and difficult to get done at a price that's fair, by the way, and does not compromise your long term as a football team, something as difficult to do on that front as a blockbuster trade at the deadline, When you use words like need and they need to do it right now, with the kind of really the intention or the notion, by the way, that if the deal does not get done, it's somehow an indictment on the organization, on Chris Ballard, because they just had to do it. You end up, as I alluded to before, no different than the child in the toy store who's angry at his mom because she won't buy him that Lego set he sees on the third shelf. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. And you end up falling into the same trap that made you say things like, you have to fire Steichen, you have to fire Ballard, you have to trade for L'Jarius Sneed. How about that as a throwback? You have to draft Richardson. You have to start Richardson. Taking stances like that are so rigid, that are just so rooted in it's my way or the highway, are just wrong so often, far too often, for me to really take those stances myself. Like, I can't in good faith come to you as someone who's trying to tell you the story of the Indianapolis Colts as accurately as I possibly can. I can't take that stance. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying the Colts should not make a trade. I'm not saying it couldn't benefit them. But when the overwhelming mainstream consensus is one thing, and it's that it needs to happen, you're always, always wise to examine the other side. So today, we are going to talk about the idea of the Colts making a move at the trade deadline as it approaches. They have until Tuesday, November 4th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We're already starting to see some moves get made around the league, and it's no secret that the Colts pass rush and secondary up to this point have left a little bit to be desired in terms of consistent production. They've had some moments, but when you look at kind of the how well the rest of the team has played, you do look at those two units and say, hey, can we get a little more production here? So we're going to explore the idea of trading for both of those positions. And after that, we'll discuss some of the ideas and players surrounding those discussions and what I think about them. Sound good? Sound like an episode? I hope so, because you've got no choice. I've already started. We're already here. And before we get into it, you know what it is? I got to introduce the show. My name is Justin. This right here is the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. As always, asking on watching and enjoying the show. Go ahead, shoot a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're on our way to 5,000 subscribers over here on the YouTube channel. So if you keep coming back, enjoying the show, perhaps it's your first day here and you're enjoying the perspective, you're enjoying the life lesson I gave to you moments ago, hit that subscribe button, never miss an episode again. Audio listeners, of course, leave a five-star review. Last week, we had the most listened to audio version of this show in the history of it, and it wasn't even all that close. And that really is all about you guys leaving those reviews and helping me grow on that platform. So I greatly appreciate anyone who has, anyone who hasn't. Maybe now's the time, maybe not. I appreciate you guys listening. I appreciate you guys being here, and I appreciate you guys being a part of the discussion. Of course, if you're on YouTube, speaking of the discussion, and you find yourself in the comment section, be civil with one another. We may disagree from time to time, but ultimately we're all on the same team, right? There's no need for infighting and name calling. Ultimately, we're rooting for the same thing, and it's the Indianapolis Colts. It's for the shoe over here. We're all on the same page. So without further ado, let's get back into the regularly scheduled programming. And I want to start in the secondary, because between the secondary and the pass rush, I feel that this is the position where I have a much more clear, concrete stance on what it is that I think should be done. And I suppose what I'll do is I'll lead with my position, right? So I'll give you the goods right off the bat, but only if you promise that if you disagree with me, you'll at least hear my explanation for why I feel this way, okay? So here it is. I don't believe that the Colts have any need at all to make a big move in the secondary right now as it stands this season. I can see a depth move, but I don't even know if that's needed. So now that I've said that, as you promised, here comes the explanation. I hope your ears are open. The big issue this year for the Indianapolis Colts when it comes to this secondary has been health. Keep in mind, coming into the year, this Colts secondary on paper was viewed as really a strength of this football team. Like, with all the nonsense that went on last year, they really went all in on improving this thing on all fronts, from a coaching aspect and a personnel aspect, right? Of course, Luan Arumo, who's a kind of a defensive back specialist, as a defensive coordinator himself. Chris Hess, or is it Chris Hess? I always get the names confused. It's Chris, I ruined the point. The guy from the Ravens. He's a guy who was with them for over a decade. You bring in Ward, you bring in Bynum, all these guys. And ultimately, that strength was turned into a weakness once again due to injuries. Injuries have ravaged the situation for the Indianapolis Colts. from Justin Wally, fellow Justin, tearing his ACL early before really the season even started, to Jalen Jones dealing with that hamstring injury. And the list would go on and on. Xavier Howard retiring midseason for stinking like a freaking poop in a toilet. All right, that's ridiculous. Neither here nor there. Point being, you have not been able to get all of your guys out there at once. You've hardly been able to get two of them out there at once. I'm talking about your top guys coming into the year. But right now, Kenny Moore back for the Indianapolis Colts, looking healthy. Jalen Jones in the middle of his 21-day practice window coming off of IR. He'll be back soon, maybe even as soon as this week, depending on how practice goes. As I record this, we're not quite there yet, but we'll see how that plays out. And then Charvarius Ward, of course, who was the blockbuster signing and the big difference maker that this team brought in this offseason in the corner room, got put on IR after week 6 following that second concussion in, 3 weeks? I mean, that happened really, really quick, which means he is going to be out for 4 weeks starting at week 7. Of course, now we're going into week 9. Obviously, everyone who's in the protocol passes it after a week, maybe 2 at most. So we know that once the 4 weeks is up, he'll have passed it. But I want to do some quick math for you because it's very, very relevant. If he has to miss 4 games starting in week 7, week 8, week 9, week 10, the bye week in week 11, and then who's on the back end of that bye week? The Kansas City Chiefs, which means the Colts, hypothetically, theoretically is actually the more precise word there, will have approximately 2 months at the end of the season in their toughest stretch to play with all their guys together, with Kenny Moore, with Jalen Jones, with Charvarius Ward, and then those guys being out there, knock on wood, football gods allowing, will allow guys like Mekhi Blackman, Jonathan Edwards, and I hope Chris Lamons an opportunity to slide down the depth chart into their more natural roles. And then once again, you end up on the back end of this season with potentially a strength in the secondary, and at minimum, a secondary that would be playing its best football of the season in the back end of the stretch come playoff time. And I think them being 7-1 affords them the luxury of waiting for all of that to come together. That's just my opinion, especially when you talk about the trade market and potentially bringing another guy on, knowing you already pay Kenny Moore, you already pay Charvarius Ward, you pay Cam Bynum, and you have Nick Cross's contract coming up as well. It's just unlikely that the Colts take on someone that they would have to pay long term. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, if we were to move over to defensive end, and more specifically a pass rusher, I think that's the big bugaboo for everybody. That's a little bit more interesting, right? Because we have no shortage of defensive ends when they're all on the field. But what we're looking for specifically is a piece that can kind of elevate the tenacity of this group, the consistency of the pass rush. We know they have their moments, but over the course of 4 quarters, you just don't always feel week to week that they're making the impact maybe that you would like them to make. You look at the interior of the defensive line. The defensive tackles have been great as pass rushers this year, at least relative to the position. But we all know that the elite of the elite at pass rushers are going to be at the defensive end spot. And Laiatu Latu has had spurts. JTT, I thought, came in this past week and did pretty good for his first real outing out there, right? With no Ebicom and no Lewis. And JTT, by the way, for anyone wondering, that's short for JT Tumawalu, whose name I'm not entirely convinced I pronounced correctly. Therefore, I call him JTT out of a level of respect. Nonetheless, I thought he went out there and played pretty well. Kwity Paye, we know what he brings. He's a solid presence in there. He could be better, but also, which I don't feel gets mentioned enough, he could be much, much worse, okay? People make it like Kwity Paye is some sort of scrub. He's not. Kwity Paye is a good football player, okay? That's not a bad football player at all. But we did see this past week, they were so thin at pass rusher without Ebicom and Lewis that the DTs really did a lot of that work. Adebaware, what if I told you he led the defensive tackle unit in snaps due to his ability as a pass rusher this week? Neville Gallimore had more snaps than Grover Stewart at defensive tackle, in part due to the same exact thing, his ability to rush the passer. So my point in bringing that stuff up is this is kind of a position, a role right now with Kwity Paye's contract expiring, with Ebicom's contract expiring, Latu still in the early stages of his rookie deal. where it would make some sense to invest. Like, again, I'm not going to go and say you need to, right? But would it make sense to if you're the Indianapolis Colts? Yeah, I think it most certainly can. But there is one caveat, which is easier said than done, by the way, if you're doing a trade. If you're to make a trade right now, if you're the Indianapolis Colts for a pass rusher, for a defensive end for this team, you have to know for sure that whatever you are bringing in is an upgrade over what you have, not just as a pass rusher, but potentially as an overall player as well. And I'll explain what I mean. This is actually a natural way, by the way, to work into the ideas, to the players, right? So right off the bat, Will McDonald, pass rusher, New York Jets, very solid in that role, 10.5 sacks last year. He's under contract through next year with a team option that could potentially keep him through 2027. But when you look at him, the one thing that you don't love is his ability or lack thereof as a run stopper. He just has not shown enough improvement in that area since he's been a rookie. So for you to bring him in, you really have to kind of think about, okay, if you did swap him in some form with Kwity Paye, right? Maybe Paye and a pick for Will McDonald and a pick. Would Will McDonald's prowess as a pass rusher override? Because right, it's not like Kwity Paye brings nothing at all as a pass rusher. We just know he's not like a premier one. Would the what you gain from McDonald's as a pass rusher override what you would then lose from Kwity Paye against the run? Because sure, you're going to be improving in one facet of the game, but is it enough to offset the deficit in the other facet of the game, which again is against the run? I don't have an answer to that question, but that is the question that you'd have to ask, and it would be a reason, that would be a red flag as to why you would not go trade for a Will McDonald. Then you have guys like Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, who I know you guys want me to get to. Okay, they make far too much money. I would love it, okay? But those guys just aren't going to be getting traded to the Indianapolis Colts, plain and simple. I thought maybe that the New York Giants would be willing to do business for Kayvon Thibodeau, which was my favorite idea of them all, but they've kind of quickly, as an organization, been injected with a little bit of life in that building, right? So I doubt they're going to be sellers at the deadline, especially with a player of his caliber. Jalen Phillips is a guy from the Miami Dolphins. In theory, he makes a level of sense, and he does sort of fit the profile of someone that Ballard would take a chance on. Some injuries in the past, but he's got a ton of tools and upside, maybe a little bit undervalued as a player right now. Like perhaps what he would come in and produce far exceeds what you would have to give up to get him. But at the same time, the concern I have with him is much like the concern I have with Will McDonald. Is it enough of an upgrade to warrant shaking up what it is that we already have? I don't know the answer to that question, but in me asking it, I suppose I'm tipping my cap. I'm not so sure, right? Like, I'm not so bullish on the idea that those guys would come in and really make a big difference for this team. I'd be more than willing to buy in if they made the move, but as we stand right now, I'm not convinced about it. So you take all of those things into account at defensive end, and then you think about the options, and it kind of brings us all back to where we started, the earliest of discussions at this position, going all the way back to the offseason. All roads seem to lead to the same destination. Trey Hendrickson, that is the guy that makes the most sense of any option at defensive end right now for the Indianapolis Colts. He, much like Kwity Paye, who, by the way, I keep bringing up Paye as opposed to Ebukam. Both of them are on expiring contracts, but Ebukam's hurt, right? You can't trade a guy that's injured. So if you're going to trade any of these defensive ends, in theory, it would have to be Kwity Paye if you're looking at it through the prism of an expiring contract, because you have to free up some money. The Colts are near the bottom of the league in cap space right now, right? So you're going to have to do something. But Kwity Paye and Trey Hendrickson, both under contract through the end of this season, and that's it. So there's no long-term commitment, right? Getting Trey Hendrickson fits the mold of being a win-now move, but with no strings attached. And you basically take a guy in Hendrickson who brings that same dual threat as a defensive end, in the sense that he's a strong pass rusher and he's a run stopper, just like Kwity Paye. But you kind of take it and you turn it up to 11, right? You ever see Spinal Tap? You just take it and you turn it up to 11, right? If Kwity Paye's a McDouble, Trey Hendrickson is a quarter pounder, right? The same thing, but just much, 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 much better. None of that, of course, is to mention the connection to Smooth Lou Gabagoo from Staten Island, right? They obviously had that time together in Cincinnati. One thing to note, though, with Trey Hendrickson is he did re-aggravate that hip injury he's been dealing with this past week, so I'm not sure where it stands. Of course, that's not just about kind of how quickly he would play for the Colts and how much that would affect him with the Colts. But again, you can't trade a player that's injured, from my understanding. I'm not sure if that's strictly an IR thing or what, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Someone feel free to correct me. If a guy's out and he couldn't play that week, you can't trade him. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. So those are my thoughts on the defensive end situation. But if we're to work our way back to corner, for me, it's really two guys if you're going to make a move there. It's Riq Woolen and it's Alontae Taylor. Much like most trade candidates at this juncture in the season, their contracts are expiring, right? So it's going to be a little bit of a rental. Maybe you keep them long term, but maybe you don't. Riq Woolen is maybe the most popular name, right? Because this is a guy that came in as a sixth-round pick a few years ago, obviously during his rookie season, took the league by storm, right? Was just a phenomenal rookie, an amazing rookie year out of Riq Woolen, and looked like he was about to be a superstar in this league. But since then, still effective, sure, but not quite on the trajectory that maybe you expected him to be on as a rookie. A little bit inconsistent as a tackler and in coverage overall. That said, he's 6'4", blazing speed, good in man coverage. Luanarumo is a guy right now. The Colts are kind of in the upper end of the mid-range right now. Like, I don't know the exact number. Maybe 12th, 13th in terms of man coverage run in the league. Luanarumo is a guy that I'd imagine would be liking to run man coverage a little bit more than he has, and he hasn't been able to do that due to a level of personnel. How many times can you say do in a row? Do. All right, neither here nor there. Riq Woolen would allow them to play a little bit more man coverage. And then the other guy is Alontae Taylor, and that's a guy not a lot of people know, right? He's from the Saints, and he's a guy that I think would fit well with Luanarumo because he's known for his versatility, right? He can play outside, he can play inside, and then he can play man coverage and zone coverage at a pretty good level as well, which is really a dream for a guy like Luanarumo who tries to do so many different things on the defensive side of the ball. And then in a perfect world, you would have a player who could kind of bend and mold to what it is that you're trying to do on the defensive side of the football. Alontae Taylor is one of the better guys they have over there in New Orleans, but obviously they're a while away. And they have a lot of other young corners, so he's a guy to watch. Another name that just popped in my head is Cam Taylor-Britt. That's a name that's probably going to get thrown around. I don't know about all of that personally. I mean, he was good enough in the Bengals to get Luanarumo fired, right? The Bengals' pass defense last year was brutal, right? And then this year, they've also been brutal. And he was still healthy scratch this past week. The talent for Cam Taylor-Britt, definitely there. And I suppose as I think about it, it does sound like a little bit better of an idea because it's not like you'd expect them to be your top guy. He'd be your third, fourth, maybe even fifth guy on this depth chart. So, all right, there's three guys that you could potentially trade for. But if it's not one of them, you maybe make a move for depth. But I don't know. I think if you're the Colts, you can just sit still at corner. Like, I don't hate any of those ideas, but at what cost, right? At what cost would it take to bring in one of those guys? That's ultimately the question. And that's kind of a conversation on the trades for the Indianapolis Colts. Sure, linebacker's a part of it. I don't really anticipate them making a move there. If you wanted my prediction for whether or not the Colts make a big move, I think they'll make a move that ends up potentially making an impact. I think they might. But I don't see it being, outside of Trey Hendrickson, a name that's going to excite a lot of Colts fans. Like, I just don't see that being a possibility. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Of course, that right there was an episode. My name is Justin. This right here is the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. Like, subscribe if you have not yet. And as always, go Colts.